Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I want to say evening, everyone. Hope all of you are doing well and all of you are healthy and safe on this beautiful Thursday. Good evening to those people tuning in from North America, and good night and good morning in the APAC EMEA region. Well, I am really excited for today's show. This is part 3 of Dismantling, Discrimination, and Enabling Diversity through 4 ships. This series is made possible by Chief of Heart, a culture science company. I'm your host, Mila Dushul, founder of Chief of Heart. Well, before I go on any further, I have to say this. Please do subscribe to my YouTube channel, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, as I bring you every Wednesday and Thursdays about rethink culture and how culture science should be explored from a three-pronged perspective, as in home, society, and work. So to start off the show, I'd like to just talk a little bit about how BLM has catalyzed awareness on the lack of equity and humane treatment in our society. As a whole, this movement has powerfully pushed the whole world to speak about discrimination courageously, and that means even at the workspace. Discrimination and bullying happens at the workplace, and according to Harvard research, 25 to 50% of people experience bullying or discrimination at some point in their careers. When we have systems, policies, inept people in place to gatekeep others, equity will never become possible. The past 2 weeks, I sat with POC communities from all around the globe to engage in conversations to hear about their struggles and how they have navigated through the discourse landscape through their whole lives and the solutions they have found along the way. I also had the opportunity to get real with POC communities in how discrimination must end even within their own ethnic groups, via marginalization, tokenization, colorism. To dismantle discrimination, racism, and enable change, we must have real honest conversations about struggles of the dismissed. In addition to that, we must have these difficult, honest conversations with the white communities as well, where most are coming forward as allies of POCs to fight discrimination. We have seen an uprise of calls to the police by white folks who deliberately weaponize their tears. The internet is bursting with more and more real-life examples of how racial discrimination happens, and these treatments are from people who are VPs of a company or are business owners. This then backs for the bigger question as to who are we enabling in our systems to further amplify discrimination. These systemic placements can further displace POCs from resources in attaining equity. In order to find solutions for the larger scope, we have to create allyships, partnerships, sponsorships through heartship within communities that have polarized thoughts on this. We have white communities who are anti-racism, and on the other hand, we have those who adopt the narrative and behavior of go back to where you came from. Today, we will be speaking on being a sponsor amongst other teams with the white community and how we as a collective community can build a landscape of sponsorship. So I'm just overwhelmed with today's guest, right? Overwhelmed in a good way. They're just fantabulous. Yes, I just combined fantastic and fabulous, fantabulous people, epic humans. So due to the influx, I can only bring 5 people at a time. So we'll be switching screens. So let me bring one by one. The first person I'm going to introduce is Family. So let me bring her on first. So let me add her. Yes. All right. So welcome, Family. So Family, aka Emily, how is Silicon Valley's gender inclusion strategies? In terms of our talk today, she made waves recently with a viral video, Allyship 101, anti-racism for well-meaning white feminists and queer people. Welcome, family. All right, fantastic. So my next guest, I'm really honored to bring him on. Let's add him to the screen. Welcome, Oleg. Oleg is the executive director of Overcoming Odds and is an advocate for humanity and a longtime friend of mine, where I stalked him on LinkedIn and we just started following our content and we became friends. And here you are. Welcome to the show, Oleg.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And the next brilliant human I have is Topongo Turk. I absolutely love her nursery. I had to mention that. So Topongo Turk is a former anti-racist elementary educator and teacher coach turned sex positive facilitator. She's a queer, inclusive community builder looking to create a sex positive world. Welcome, Topongo. All right. Next, we have got Mira Stern. So let's bring on Mira Stern as soon as I locate you on my screen. There you go, Mira. All right. Welcome, Mira. So Mira is another applicant. Mira Stern is a queer, white Jew born and raised in San Francisco who currently lives in Oakland as a settler on Chochenyo Island, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, land. Mira consults with tech companies, organizations, and school systems to develop equity strategies for long-term impact rooted in racial justice and community building. She is a lifelong educator and advocate for collective, focusing on developing white anti-racist consciousness and capacity for change. Thank you for being here, Mira. My next guest is Julie Sutwash. So let me add her on. Welcome, Julie. All right, so we have Julie Sutwash as an executive director of Disability Solutions, co-host of the Crazy and the King podcast, mother of a gay son, and person living with multiple mental health disabilities. She works every day to listen more and to take action to change lives for her community and lift the voices of others. Thank you for being here, Julie.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And next up, we have got Sean Martin. So let me locate you, Sean. All right. Welcome to the show. And welcome to the show. I was about to say welcome to the Sean. Welcome to the show. Sean. He is the founder of Rebase. In his own words, he is a speaker, author, and entrepreneur. I love that term, entrepreneur. He helps hiring managers and how to make hiring easy. Again, welcome, Sean. Next up,
I'm humbled to be here.
Absolutely. Next up, we have Katie Van Horn. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Right. All right, fantastic. So Katie Van Horn is a former VP engagement and inclusion diversity strategist, speaker, and a coach helping companies meet their goals with work, laughter, and at times a kick in the pants. I love that introduction of yours. Welcome, Katie. Welcome, everyone, for being here. I'm really appreciative of all of you being here. So to kickstart the conversation, let me add a few more panelists to the stream. Here we go. So thank you for being here. I know this is a very hard conversation to have, and for viewers, listeners out there, I kindly request you to listen with an open mind, and do not be afraid to ask questions, right? Because this is a safe space. We want to have questions, even if you are fearful of POCs like myself. This is a space where you have your community over here to answer questions and to really dismantle discrimination and enable diversity. So to start the conversation, I would like to pose this question. how do each of you feel about what is going on in our nation with BLM, and how do you see that playing out in your lives personally?
All right, I'll jump in. So I live in Arizona, and so we are a fairly red state. Our president was here last night, actually, for a rally. And so we have a fairly active Republican Party, but we're actually trying to do a lot of things here in Arizona to focus on how do we move forward? How do we, really start to focus on things that haven't been able to be focused on in the past. So we're trying to change the state to purple, at least. From a Black Lives Matter perspective, really all of my clients are really focused on what does this mean for their organization and how do they do this in the right way? How do they address some of these things in the right way? Because I think a lot of times leaders and HR folks are just anxious with how do I actually say things the right way? How do I do things the right way? So it doesn't come across as performative allyship. It really comes across as an authentic communication and being a true ally, an active ally, if you will. So I think the piece that's really my team, the companies that I'm working more focused on is how do we make this real? And also, how do we make it sustainable and not something that passes with the next news cycle?
Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else would like to jump in and share?
Yeah, I can jump in. In Indianapolis, like Katie, we're a very red state, and we're doing a lot of work to push the boundaries as we can. But just before kind of the George Floyd issue happened, murder happened, we had 3 people of color in the city of Indianapolis murdered by police in a 48-hour period. And so we've dealt with long-term systemic racism within the Indianapolis Police Department for a long time. And so while there's a lot of rage and angst and upset that I think we're all dealing with here locally, it feels a little different, I think, than it does normally. We've had record number of protests, and a lot of, I think, for a lot of us as white Hoosiers, the feeling that we can make a change, that we can make an impact this time, and a lot of great direction from Black leadership in the advocacy community that is coaching us to be able to be active allies and give activities, things that we should do with our voices, funds we should support, those kind of things. And I think for me, it's given us a real sense of hope. We're having a lot of tough conversations still every single day here in Indiana, but I feel more confident, I think, than I felt in the past about these type of progress and conversations.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
I really want to let the ladies go first.
I know for me, what I've been doing is really being able to talk to my personal friends about where they sit in their whiteness. And I think at first it was a lot of people being like, well, what do I do? And I have a blog and I want to make a blog post with a bunch of resources. And I was like, that's fine if you want to have give your audience resources, but where do you sit? What are your resources for you first? If you're just deciding you went from all lives matter to Black Lives Matter the day George Floyd died, we can't, like, your blog does not now become the holder for all of the information, right? You can't just pull that from other places. So I had to kind of, and these are my well-meaning white lady friends, and it's how do I steer their conversation to be more focused on themselves, and where do you sit in your whiteness, and how can you be vulnerable to your readers to say, oh, wow, I was like this and I want to be like that, and here's the steps that I'm taking. Because I think that authentic vulnerability and shift is really what people are looking for, is they're looking for people that they can say, I want to do that work too, but I don't know how. But if all you're consuming is people who have already done the work, then you feel left out. You feel behind the curve, and you don't want to push yourself to take that extra step, because then you feel too seen, That's what I've been doing, is really having a lot of conversations with friends that are ready to have that, that are ready to take that step.
Yeah, I'll go next to piggyback off that. I've been having a lot of conversations with my clients who are entrepreneurs. I live in California, but my clients live all over, and helping them figure out how to authentically come forward and say that Black Lives Matter for all of my clients. They haven't all been doing the work for a long time. And so helping them both get quickly on the road to learning about anti-racism and their own white privilege, while also posting and writing letters to their folks, to their employees, and to their customers that reflect truly how they feel, and to make real commitments about the future. As well as when these are mostly white women business owners, when they get really freaked out or jazzed about a topic, both of which are happening right now, they want to overpromise lots of things they don't know that much about. And so that's problematic. So I'm helping them rein back in and not, as Topanga said, transition their blog about home decor into an anti-racist blog when they're just not the right person to be writing that blog. In fact, there are millions of Black women already writing that blog, and we don't need a white woman who's on day 2 of her journey to be writing that blog. So that's the spectrum I'm navigating right now.
I'll share. So I think in terms of Black Lives Matter expanding in its movement, right? This is already a 7-year-old movement in this capacity, in this, decade or this century. And, in 2013, when Mike Brown was murdered in Ferguson, Missouri, there were protests and uprising all throughout the country. And when Black Lives Matter became the rallying cry of this, our generation, there was a lot of capacity for folks to engage, look at our whiteness, look at our privilege, look at the power, look at every unearned resource that we hold, right? And be pushed into a lifetime of anti-racist work. I think a lot of people took that invitation back then, and now we're seeing another opportunity for folks to engage. My worry is that, it's a trend. You're already seeing companies kind of like back down on some of their promises and say, oh, like this is something we'll do in 2021 instead, right? But it's urgent, right? It's nothing but urgent. And I think we are being given an invitation to enter into work that is not just for Black folks' humanity, but our humanity as well. And it's a never-ending journey. And so I think seeing quick wins now is, some surface stuff might change, but it really is about companies and individuals and families and collectives committing to a lifetime of what it means to redistribute power and wealth and positionality. If you look at the civil rights movement, Brown versus Board of Education happened in 1954, and it wasn't until 1965 that the Voting Rights Act was passed. That's over 10 years of movement work and boycotts and community organizing and death and suffering, right? And so we have the opportunity to try to eliminate as much suffering as possible while shifting into, that lifelong commitment of anti-racist struggle.
Hi, I'm thrilled to be here. First of all, very humbled that you'd even asked me to join this conversation. I'm here in Austin, Texas, and we are the little blue dot in the big red state, as they call it. I am pretty apolitical as far as party affiliation goes, but what I see in Black Lives Matter and this resurgence, despite the unfortunate consequences of COVID and like this kind of perfect storm we're in, which is unfortunate for a lot of people, I do think that it's been really helpful for helping this movement get traction, and it's long overdue. I've seen the impact of systemic racism up close and personal. I've seen it in prison systems. I've seen it in court systems. I've seen it in the workplace. I spent 26 years working in software engineering where there's no discrimination problems just for all 90% white men, right? Like I've seen discrimination in play, and it's quiet in a lot of places. It's not obvious, it's very subtle. And so I think that this focus that we have on righting these wrongs now is, like I said, long overdue. And I do agree that it's going to take diligence, like people being diligent over time. It is not a trend. It will not be solved by this time next month. It will not be solved by this time 5 years, 10 years from now. And it requires diligence, I think, from individuals. And I think that that's the biggest thing for me, at least, as a privileged white man, trying to figure out what can I do? How can I help? It's not just about posting a Black picture on Instagram one day. It's about what can I do over the long term and how I can continue to help. And so for me, that's how it manifests, at least in my daily life, is really stopping and listening for once. And I know that sounds terrible. It makes me sound egotistical. I'm so used to speaking and helping and trying to help and solve problems. Now I need to listen to understand the problems and then maybe try to help. So again, thank you.
If I may expand upon that, first of all, thank you so much for having me as part of this panel and all the shared insights that have been passed on so far. There are a couple of things that come to mind, and the first one being is this. Language matters. And I think when it comes to the words that oftentimes I even use in starting these conversations and how I frame them. And so if I put words such as hard, difficult, or tough, well, the question that I started to ask myself is, what about that is difficult? What about that is tough? And what about that is hard? And in kind of asking myself those questions prior to having a conversation that may be uncomfortable, I actually put myself in situations where I can learn things that I didn't learn before or didn't know before. The other thing that I would like to expand upon, which a couple of the people in this group have already touched, is the importance of accessing resources. So part of the work that I've done for however long, 2 or 3 years, has been interviewing people through form of podcasts, different events, and of different backgrounds. And the whole reason for that is to gain a better understanding of a person's experience and lived experience and lived perspective. In this case, what I'm learning through my own personal experience is that when it comes to the different issues that are faced within the Black community, I'm noticing that not every single individual is in the position or wanting to be in a position to have a conversation where I, as a white male, approaches them to learn more based on their experience. And so one of the things that I chose to do is really look inward and put myself in situations with people who are in those positions, who are willing to have those conversations and not enforce my agenda, my expectations, and my assumptions that just because an individual is part of the Black community, therefore he or she is willing to have a conversation like that. And so I think recognition of that is key, and understanding that, especially with the movement of Black Lives Matter, my opinion of it is because there is no single figure that speaks on behalf of that movement, it becomes difficult to understand who do you go to, who do you have a conversation with. So in a way, what I thought of was that because there's no single person that speaks on that behalf, at least to my knowledge, then there are many opportunities for people to be in that leadership role and to have those conversations with. So for me to kind of conclude this perspective, it really boils down to choosing to go to within, identifying which of those conversations are tough and why are they tough to begin with.
Thank you for sharing, everyone. Those are really imperative, insightful points that all of you have brought up, right? And it speaks a lot about, the kind of work that each of you have been doing in your spaces, and that is the kind of allies and partners and sponsors that we need in communities right now. So I want to shift the gear a little bit from BLM to the whole spectrum of discrimination, right? Because discrimination has been happening in the United States and at a larger scale in the globe against people of color or people with disabilities, right? It can go nuanced more. So I want to take a moment and acknowledge it from a larger lens, a widened lens. How have you identified this systemic discrimination? And how have you navigated through this viscous landmine as allies? So it could be if you're doing work in the United States. How have you become allies, not just for the Black community, but other communities who are considered as minorities or are marginalized? So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
I can start. So as a framework, I like to think about my work, my allyship work, in 3 buckets, 3 arenas that need to happen in order to be doing good work. So the first of all is internal. So looking at my own privilege, whether that is white privilege or I am queer, but I look straight, so straight looking privilege, etc. So looking at my own privilege and seeing how that power has negatively affected other communities and how I can use that power to elevate other communities and individuals in those communities. Interpersonal, so between people, making sure that I'm not causing harm between myself and those from other underestimated or marginalized communities, as well as using interpersonal exchanges to call in folks, especially white women and other white people, when we're talking about race, to motivate them to get better on race and racism. And then the most important, which is what you're asking about, is about the systemic change, so the institutional change, so working on solutions that change the systems, education, law, policies, and that really move the needle there for the entire community, or for most of the Black community, for example, not just the one Black coworker that you have who also hopefully you're not causing harm to.
I think that's great. And I would add allyship in my mind, and we'll talk about systematic discrimination as well, but from an allyship perspective, it's a daily journey. And so it's the stuff that you do behind the scenes. It's not necessarily what is going to get you on a webinar. It's the stuff that you're doing to support anyone who's in an underrepresented group or in a marginalized group. What are you doing to bring their voices forward, and not speak for them, but bring their voices forward and give them space to speak and to be able to be heard? And then also from the kind of systematic piece, looking at every single policy, procedure in an organization, even just, the employee handbook. How are you speaking about your employees? Are you using the correct pronouns? Do you offer benefits that are appropriate for your organization or for the folks that you would like to recruit? Are you being thoughtful about every process and how it might limit certain groups and advantage other groups? So how are you thinking about all of those pieces to the puzzle? And that's kind of inside an organization. Externally, I think it's also just calling people out when you see stuff that isn't right. When you hear a family member make an off-color joke, when you're in a restaurant and you see something go down that isn't right, being able to speak up and really support folks and not necessarily get involved with the actual conversation, but just be there in support of and give space to the folks who need that support.
I think I can kind of jump in from Katie's perspective too. We work with companies every day to help build system-wide, enterprise-wide solutions to hire people with disabilities. And as a white woman with a hidden disability, I have a lot of privilege. And over the past year and a half, I really kind of have set on this journey of making sure that I'm not just thinking about disability in its totality, but thinking about all of the different parts of diversity within disability, and then taking that message on the road. I have a lot of privilege to have a platform. And so I see that platform as a means to educate the general public about our community, but also about how Black women with visible disabilities have the highest unemployment rate in this country, and they also have the highest pay gap. I need to be having that conversation, as well as promoting women of color with disabilities onto the stage to have that conversation. And I've also done just a lot of engagement within our community, the disability community, who has been really focused on disability civil rights, about the work that the Black community has done in support of disability civil rights and how we should be standing with them now, not just because they've led the way so much of the time, but because they're a huge part of our community and we're a huge part of their community. And so I've really focused my platform on raising that awareness and also checking better my own privilege and making sure that I'm constantly learning, as Katie said, but that I'm also adjusting the way that I speak and that I think, and I'm thinking before I act a lot of times.
Something that's important to me in terms of showing up for many different struggles is just approaching everything with a lens of intersectionality, right? Coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the early 90s. No movement is unilateral, right? And if we're working for our collective liberation, then we need to be centering the folks who live at the intersection of the most oppression, right? And all the different layers of systemic injustice. For example, here in the Bay Area, from San Francisco, currently live in Oakland, which is Ohlone territory. And we are often totally erasing and invisibilizing Native struggle from our conversations, right? Our hiring, our understanding of history, our media, our conversations just about like who exists on this land. And so work I'm dedicated to is reparations work, trying to raise money, particularly from the white Jewish community, to pay the She'umi land tax, which is an urban indigenous women-led land trust, the first ever urban land trust in the United States, being led by Ohlone women who are working to buy their land back, which is wild that they even need to be doing that, right? But the work is about coming like together, particularly as white Jews who have a different experience than white non-Jews, and showing up for some of the most marginalized folks, right? So I think every time we have an opportunity to connect one of our identities and one of the layers of oppression we might live at with other folks, we have a lot of opportunity to engage in our collective experience and our collective liberation.
For me, when I was a first grade teacher, it was all my students were Black and brown kids in the inner city in the Western Addition of San Francisco. And what I tried to do in my classroom was really being able to be as inclusive as humanly possible with an equity lens on how I delivered my curriculum, with an equity lens on how I did my behavior systems. And oftentimes in first grade, students are not diagnosed with their disability yet. So they're in our classrooms and we just have to make these modifications for them. I wasn't a special ed teacher per se, but I was, because the students already had learning differences that were there. And so often they go unseen or they just get pushed into special ed. And my understanding was always, well, we're just going to teach all the kids that I have in my room. And so I'm going to create this space that allows everyone to thrive and be who they really are, because they come with so much trauma that they're not able to see themselves as 6-year-old kids. They see themselves as full-grown adults because they need to be in order to survive in their home life. So like Oleg said, it was like, understanding someone else's lived experience and being able to make modifications to my lived experience to be able to make their lived experience as beneficial as possible. And now when I want to create my own adult communities, I want to do the same thing where I'm being accessible to as many different types of gender orientation, sexual expressions, disabilities, as body types, sex types, as possible. So it's just creating that space where everyone feels free to be themselves and being able to feel seen in any space they take up.
I love everything I've heard so far. I've been, like I said before, I've been in the software engineering space for so long, and eventually found myself in hiring roles where I was an executive and reviewing resumes and interviewing people. And I think that I'm the farthest thing from an HR person, even though I operate in the hiring coaching space. Sometimes the inability to express your resume, right, as a non-native English speaker can work against you. Sometimes in interviews, sometimes in phone screens, these things can work against people when the folks in the position of power are not able to actually navigate through maybe a less than ideal resume, right? Maybe a phone screen or an interview where they can't quite understand folks as well. Also in the engineering space, I mean, like I said, in the US, we're predominantly white male as far as software engineers are concerned. And doing as much as you can to hire the best people while also focusing on the importance of diversity of opinions and diversity of backgrounds is super important. I remember being like modestly proud of the fact that in software engineering, 10% of the workforce is female. And I could feel like, well, we're at 16%, so that's not great, but at least it's better than the average, and I need to do better. And that's kind of where I focus my energy is, where can I make a change? Where can I affect change while also like not downgrading or underestimating little improvements, if that makes any sense. And the last thing I'll just say on this, which may be a little bit unpopular, is to make sure that you're encouraging people to do the little things that they can and do the smaller things. I don't find shame to be a very good motivator. So I try not to shame people for not doing enough or for not doing what they could or for not taking grand action. I prefer to encourage them for what it is that they are doing, if only because I find it to be a better motivator. And at the end of the day, we all just have to seek to understand what other people are going through and try to be as empathetic as possible and not villainize each other too much whenever we're all, I believe, trying to actually make gradual and eventually massive change.
Thank you for sharing. I believe Emily has got something to say. So, Fatmali, let me add you quickly to the stream, Fatmali. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, Sean, I just had a piggyback on the engineering thing. I do most of my work with tech, and yesterday, since it was Women in Engineering Day, I was giving a lot of speeches to tech. And we were talking about exactly what you're saying, which is about the pipeline, et cetera. And there are a couple of things I just want to say about this in case there are any recruiting people or engineering or tech people on the phone or on the line. So 20% of all computer science grads are women and 30% of all computer science master's students are women. And so companies, if they just source from computer science, which as you were saying, Sean, like you should have a much wider net for where you source for sure. If you just source from there, you should be able to get like 25% or so of women in engineering in your company. The second thing is about hiring, and this is about both race diversity and gender diversity in your company. There was a Harvard study that showed that if you have only one person who is a woman or a person of color in your hiring pool, another, and then everyone else is a white dude, you have statistically no chance of hiring the minority person or the woman. It's 0.0001 something. So like you could find a couple examples in the whole United States, right? But generally you can't. So if you work really hard to get women/minorities, racial minorities in the pool, to get one in the pool, you're wasting your time. You may as well not even get anyone in the pool. You can search it under 2 in the pool. Harvard, they did that study. So the point here is, if you really want to diversify the people you're actually hiring, not just having them come in for an interview, you have to have 2 qualified candidates who are other, so women/racial minorities for tech, in the pool. Yes, I see that Sean has a response too.
I mean, if I may, so I've seen some things working in the hiring space and coaching people in the hiring space where some businesses will they have a plugin for their applicant tracking system, the ATS, was like, oh, well, we blur out everybody's names, and that makes us culturally, ambiguous or what have you, or agnostic. That is not enough. It's also, like you said, it's about not just interviewing people who look differently than you, which I love tech, I love startups, but let's be honest, mostly white male folks. It is about one of the biggest things I stress to anybody who's hiring as a small business or as a startup. You have to have objective measurements for the people you're evaluating. It can't just be interviewers saying, yeah, I think they're a good fit. Yeah, I think they're a bad fit. No, I'm not sure they're a culture fit, because a lot of times, pardon my language, none of that means shit. And it's just somebody's opinion, and it's not objective at all. So you have to have objective criteria on which to evaluate people so that you remove some of that bias and make it as objective as possible, so you're not allowing people's biases to creep in.
Thank you all for sharing that. One of the things that I wanted to touch upon is something that Sean had mentioned a couple instances. And the first one is, I think, the importance of challenging our bias, in my opinion. And I'll speak for myself. There's a book that I read that I'd like to share as a resource, or that I'm reading right now as well. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. And one of the things that I picked up from that particular book is the importance of understanding that there are certain biases that I make that are unconscious, and then there are others that are conscious. And that is, for example, 2 + 2 = 4. And so there's certain things that I could look at and develop an immediate understanding, meaning, or assumption about a particular thing. And so I think when it comes to some of the things that Sean had mentioned, as far as choosing to create spaces where I can acknowledge people for the experiences and their backgrounds, but then also understand that I might be making certain biases of my own that may be blind spots to me. And so I think asking myself the series of questions of what are those biases and how am I coming up with them is an important thing for me to take away from any opportunity to engage with an individual, and just understand that, yes, those might be real things that that are happening, but there are ways that I can learn to challenge and question those. And the other thing, one last thing I would like to share, is the importance of shame, blame, and guilt that I think oftentimes is associated, in my opinion, with situations where I may or may not know a certain thing. What I choose to do is in situations where the individual that I'm talking to may not know X, Y, and Z, I actively try and put myself in positions where I'm not there to blame that person for not knowing it, but rather encourage, share resources, share what I learned about whatever that subject may be, in order to help them develop a better foundation and baseline that they can go off of.
I love everyone's thoughts on all of this. There are a few points that really sit at. Quite a number of you speak about the hiring processes, right, and the unconscious bias. So I've been having this conversation with different communities on the unconscious bias aspects of it, and I actually had a Twitter war 2 weeks ago with someone on unconscious bias. And as we were talking about unconscious bias, how that can transfer into conscious bias, and how that can transfer into conscious discrimination. And this was a middle-aged white guy, I'm not shaming him, guy who said, it's my unconscious bias, we just learn and move on from it. But that is the problem. We should stop. There's a difference when we truly acknowledge and truly know when unconscious bias shows up and how unconscious bias shows up. There's a difference between that. And there's a difference between when you consciously know what you're doing and use unconscious bias as a sheep's skin to get away with your behavior. There's a difference between it. But the key today is not to shame anyone, but to truly understand the difference between when does unconscious bias become conscious discrimination. And conscious discrimination can show up in the form of dismissive narratives, to Oleg's point, to the way that we're hiring, to everyone's point, right? To how privilege shows up as well. So these are all the different facets. I want to acknowledge one more point into hiring processes. To rethink hiring processes, we need to challenge the whole paradigm of how resumes are being asked, right? The whole concept of workplace has not been challenged for 40 over years, for hundreds of years. It has been adopted from the Ford industry, from the industrialization era, 40-hour work week, to sitting at your desk, like treating humans as robots, right? And just pay inequity, gender inequity. And that is so granular even to the resume. We have not innovated the whole concept of resume, right? Blurring names can be one solution, but to Sean's point, there are so many different nuanced elements to how resumes are expected in the United States. If we take a look at a global perspective, resumes are required to have pictures. That clearly gatekeeps people of color, people with disabilities, right? And when you state at which year did you graduate university, ageism comes into place, a different form of discrimination. And which university did you graduate from? If you're a foreigner from Britain, you get more cookie points as opposed to a graduate from Pakistan or from Morocco. So these are different forms and different layers of discrimination that we need to come into awareness. And I don't want to take too much of time, but I want to transition into our next question. But before I transition, are there any last thoughts or any additional thoughts to this?
I think you make a great point about the hiring process, which is where we spend the majority of our time every day. And I think so many companies are just looking for that nice little checkbox fix. Well, I use this software, so now we're in the clear. Oh, I do this process, so now we're in the clear, instead of really focusing on a proactive thought process that it becomes ingrained in your culture, where we recognize that bias exists, we manage it. We're teaching our employees to manage it on their own when they're able to, and not looking for that quick tech fix for every hiring problem. And I think until we acknowledge that, this bias within our hiring system is going to exist endlessly.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Kate.
So, sorry, just to piggyback on what you said, Mila, it goes even one step further. Once you have folks in for the interview as well, if they are someone that has a different way of processing information, being put on the spot, having someone do a whiteboard exercise, all of these different things that can definitely be a barrier to someone being hired. I think any one of us could go on for hours and hours about how the interview and hiring process needs to change. So we absolutely echo everything that you've mentioned. And I think the other piece is really just, how do we think about just humans individually and how they can contribute to our organization, and think about the skills, what they bring to the table. And, Sean mentioned in our notes earlier about culture fit. And that's something that, is another barrier that people use to get people out of the process versus including them in the process. And so being really thoughtful about how do we think about each individual person and how they will add to our team, how they will add to the innovation of our team, and being able to actually be an active participant in the team is so killer and so important as we're, thinking about what hiring managers should be doing. And just on the unconscious bias, I heard a great comment yesterday from a very good friend of mine, Aubrey Blanche. Unconscious bias is dead. And we need to just be thoughtful about that fact that, the comment of, oh, I know that's a bias I have, so sorry. Nope, not an excuse anymore. And I think that's something that we just need to, especially as an ally myself, no one's let off the hook anymore. We can't allow for people to go, hey, we're just going to blame it on my bias. We're just going to say that, this is just who I am, or I don't know any better. No, absolutely not. And I think this is part of the conversation that needs to happen is, I think all of us have been very much bring everyone along on the conversation and try to really work with the folks that as they're learning and as they're growing. But part of this is also enough is enough, drawing a line in the sand, and it's time to get with the program. I
love what Katie said. I feel like giving you a hug right now, but it's
Sorry.
virtual.
I get a little fired up.
So this brings me to the next question. Right, all about solutions. Solutions does not happen overnight. Just like if you want to plant a seed, if you want to plant an apple tree or banana tree, the fruit does not grow overnight. It needs to take progression, right? Progression through allyships, through partnerships, through sponsorships, through heartship. We have to come from the heart. So my question to you is, how can the white community come together to form allyships, partnerships, and sponsorships through hardship? That should be in your education space, workspace, neighborhoods, homes, because whatever is happening at the workplace happens in schools, happens at the supermarket, happens at the bus stop, happens at the car park. So I want to hear your thoughts on this.
I'd love to weigh in on that. As an educator, I think learning and context and theory are at the core of whatever movement we are trying to make. Particularly in the United States, we are all taught a very colonial, white, patriarchal, victor's history. And so we are never, rarely, if ever, taught from the people's perspective, right, of whose land we're on, or Black folks who were kidnapped from their land, right? So we have really limited scopes of even what reality is and what that means in terms of showing up as accomplices, right? So I think education is hands down the first step, and the work happens alone and in affinity and across difference in order to get grounded, right, on a similar level. And right now, there's really no excuse at all for not doing your homework. There are thousands of resources being put online on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on people's blogs. I don't have a TV in my house, so I can't speak to what happens on TV. But grounding in your own work, right? And then particularly white folks gathering together to be building consciousness and community and solidarity amongst one another to actively oppose white supremacy and actively dismantle white supremacy is necessary if we're going to show up for any authentic movement. And I think I'd love to hear the dialogue progress into talking about not just abolishing white supremacy, but abolishing capitalism, because those two go hand in hand, right? Race in the United States was created to uphold capital and to uphold the ruling class. And so if we're hoping to fight to live in and birth a world or rebirth a world, right, without white supremacy, then we need to be dedicated to anti-capitalism as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this question from the standpoint of there are so many resources. White people know they need to do something. I mean, let's be clear. A bunch of white people have been doing this stuff for a while. Now there's this huge mass of white people who are like, what am I going to do? On the good end of the spectrum is signing up for something that's led by a Black anti-racist educator, right? And then if you're not ready for that, or if you need something different than that, then there is joining an affinity space or an anti-racist, it's called affinity space. White people get together to do anti-racism and reflect on white supremacy. And Mira actually leads an amazing group that I'm in right now. So the point there is you are being led by someone. It's all a journey. There's no experts, but you're being led by someone who's a few steps further than you. So they can call out the things where you are not as aware about them. The thing that's so those are great. What's troubling to me is seeing folks who are all just learning that there is something called white privilege and that there is something called white fragility coming together with each other and trying to move forward. Like, that's just going to be a circle of confusion. There was an article in the Washington Post this week that said when there's Black pain, white people start book clubs. And it was so moving and so true and so terrifying. So I will just say, have someone lead you, preferably a Black anti-racist educator, and also a white affinity group, because that's a space where those of you who are white and non-Black can go and not cause harm to Black folks and other folks of color who are in the group. Like, don't air this in your multiracial book club. You need a space where it's outside of the ears of Black folks and other Black and brown folks.
So I'm going to jump on that really quick. I'm so sorry, Topanga. I'm totally jumping in. The one thing I would also say, just to mirror what you're saying, Femily, is also don't depend on that Black friend or that Black person that you know that you haven't talked to since high school to be the Black person that's going to educate you. You need to do all this work on your own. And this is very hard work. And so we just need to be thoughtful that we're not putting this onto someone else to educate us. We need to take it and learn ourselves. Sorry, jumping in.
Yes, to be clear, that was to pay a Black anti-racist educator,
Yes.
for sure. Paying a Black anti-racist educator. Yes.
Yeah. And for me, when it comes to talking about unconscious bias, when I was a teacher, I then became a teacher coach. So I was coaching new teachers on being able to look at their classroom through an equity lens. And oftentimes it was white teachers teaching in a predominantly Black and brown school, being that white savior, you know, making a concerted effort to say, I'm going to teach in this school because I'm going to make a difference. And then me coming in as the coach and having to say to you, your practices are a little racist. And how do you say that to someone through a lens that allows them to still feel like they're going to be able to grow and not just completely shut down, because they are well-meaning. They do want to try their best. But then you're looking at their practices and you're like, wow, the darkest Black boy in your classroom hasn't been called on in the last 4 weeks I've been here. Why is that? And the only way to break it down for teachers was the protocol was to videotape their lessons once a semester. And I would give them leading questions with their video. So I'd say, I want you to look at how you're supporting XYZ and what you could do to support them more deeply and to show them that you're caring about them, because ignoring them away is not going to make them go away. They're not going to be learning anything more if you just ignore them away because their behaviors are too challenging for you. You have to teach them that you know that they care, that you care about them too. And they'd have to really take a mirror and look at themselves, and being able to see that video of what they were doing was so much more impactful than me just saying, hey, I think you're having an issue there, right? So when I think about creating spaces for adults, it's also saying, not only are we going to fill this space with a lot of Black and people of color and queer, diverse people so that no one is othered, we're all diverse, and then say through that space, what can I do to make everyone feel seen, like I said earlier. So whether that's a classroom or a sex party, I think it's important to be able to give people a space where they feel like they're seen and that they're a part of the club, rather than just being this accessory to whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
The end.
I love what is just said, not to be an accessory. And I want to add really quickly, I've heard so many times narratives from my white friends or narratives from my other groups or POCs where there's colorism even within POCs. But they'll say, I'm not racist because I have you as my friend. And this comes from my white friends. I'm not racist because I have you as a family member. And these are not acceptable narratives that we use. And even though it's funny, it's not funny because it's hurtful, because you're consciously saying something and saying, hey, I have a car, I can't be discriminated, I can't be a racist because look, I have a best friend who's colored. Look, I'm married to someone. I saw on Crunch, it was an online video where it was a founder of a company, a wheat company. He said, I'm not racist. I have a Spanish wife at home and 2 Spanish-speaking children. And that to me, I was absolutely gobsmacked. How can you say something of that sort? You are accessorizing, exactly to your point. You can't have tokens, people as tokens, and say, oh, I have immunity today, or I have immunity because I'm with someone. I just wanted to highlight that. Any other last words before we transition to the next question I have for all of you?
I think one other thing that I'd like to add on. Go ahead.
I just want to say one quick thing about the exceptionalism. That's like a typical tactic, which many of you who are in the field know about, but like where white people are like, oh, I grew up poor, I grew up this, I have this person, blah, blah, blah. It keeps you out of doing the work. And so it comes pretty naturally because the work is hard, and it's like the easier route is to point a finger at how come you're not really one of those white people. But the thing that I have been teaching myself, like when I want to point a finger at Amy Cooper, is to point the finger back at me and be like, yeah, whatever, that was certainly a problem. But like, where am I kind of an Amy Cooper? Where am I not calling in my friends who are probably Amy Coopers, right? Just like whenever I find myself trying to be an exception, I look right at, I just like point that finger circling back. And I've made my husband, who is white, also do that, where when we're talking about one of those weird things or exception or why it might not be, we're just like, okay, so then what's our thing we could learn? We're like doing the work in our conversations.
Anyone else wanted to add before we transition to the next question? So I really appreciate all of you sharing your insights. My next question is, as we become allies and partners and sponsors, right? Really calling out, holding other people, my white friends or your white friends accountable, and really saying, hey, it's time to change. This is not the narrative. This is not the language. Bringing awareness. That is a movement that is going on called Pass the Mic, right? I want to be as transparent as possible. Discrimination just does not happen in the workplace, schools, community, supermarket, or car park, even at McDonald's drive-thru, right? It happens even on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, it happens a lot as well. And how can we pass the mic where, even as a white community ally, as a white ally, where how can we share the stage to speak? With like podcasters, and this is a question I posed today. If you are a podcaster on LinkedIn, if you are an event holder on LinkedIn, if you have a show on LinkedIn, live LinkedIn, whatever that you do, have you been consciously inviting your POCs to your podcast, to the events to speak, to your live shows? Or are you just doing it right now because there's an uptick? And I have 6,000 followers, and I follow other people too. And that's a pattern I've been noticing for the past 3 years, where they only invite other white community people. Ever since the discrimination talk about Black Lives Matters, there's an uptick of inviting colored people. So my question is, how can we truly become allies and pass the mic? And I want to know, have you welcomed more POCs in your space? And have you welcomed more POC who are from the LGBTQ community? So I want to hear your thoughts on this.
I can jump in on this one. I think from the TA, HR, recruiting space, over the past couple of years, we've really focused on not having manels, and that's been a hot topic of conversation. But what I've seen from that is a lot of white women now on panels. And so what we need to do now is, as white women, we need to start saying, hey, I'm happy to be on this panel, but have you met yet? And I've taken it on for myself of kind of building a group of peers that are women of color who have disabilities that I can help introduce to other people and make sure that they have that opportunity to be heard, because I'm heard a lot and you don't need to hear from me all of the time. I need to help others get to that stage. And I think, what I'd like to see our community do from a TA space is making sure that we're always saying that and that we're always having that conversation, because if the women in our world are pushing it's probably going to happen. And we've seen that change happen on the manels, but we've still got a long way to go to get more diversity within the speaker space in TA and HR. A lot.
I want to complexify the idea of passing the mic a little bit. I think, yes, right? Passing the literal mic, whether you're a podcast host or educator and bringing in guest teachers, right? whether you are on panels or at conferences, right? Like constantly, asking what other folks are being paid, and then making sure that you're letting folks know, right? So that you're, hopefully as a white person, your pay can be below Black, Native, and Latinx folks. But also, you know, just to have that common language in the arena. But pass the mic for me really represents like denouncing your privilege, right? In ways that are not always comfortable, in ways that are not self-serving. And that to me is more aligned with, you know, visions of being an accomplice. So I think in addition to passing the mic, white folks need to be passing our wealth and passing our homes and passing our cars and passing our jobs, right? Like we so often view our identities and our experience as white folks in a more self-serving or ways that just like still remain or maintain the status quo. It's like, I want to see folks leave their jobs and be like, you know, you need to fill this spot with a working class Black person, right? Like what Serena Williams' husband did, right? I don't know how much it is about, you know, like the hype right now, but I think like that's what needs to happen if folks are actually talking about changing the playing field, right? If you're gonna inherit a home from your parents or another family member and you like are not homeless, maybe give the house, not even sell it, give it to a Black or Native family, right? If you have 3 cars, why do you need 3 cars when a family has 0, right? Just thinking in that pass the mic in terms of our entire lifestyle and planet. I mean, there's more than enough to go around. We know that. We have a scarcity mentality in our planet because of, you know, capitalism loves to teach us that. But I'd love to see us passing the mic across the board.
Yeah, Mira, I love what you're saying. And I think even starting small. So being able to say, hey, have you thought about this other person for a panel? But it's also, have you thought about this other person for the project that I might be winning or the proposal I might be winning? Giving other voices and letting them have the opportunity to choose who they want to choose, you know, as the buyer, but giving them other perspectives. Because I think that's part of it as well, is are we opening up the playing field that everyone has a chance? And I think a lot of times that, like, to say, hey, I'm going to give away a house, wow, that seems huge. But if we can do some of these smaller steps to say, are we leveling the playing field? Are we giving opportunities to folks that may not even know about them, much less be, you know, have the opportunity to do a proposal for them? But how are we thinking about this? And that, you know, and that is the day-to-day, that is every single move that you make. How are you including other people in the conversation, giving them a voice and giving them an opportunity? And not for any type of win on your end, but truly because it's the right thing to do. And we're all going to get better because of that.
I think one of the things that I heard throughout this conversation that I wanted to touch upon is something that Sean actually had brought up as far as sharing the mic strategically before passing it on. And I think there's a lot of value that I learned from that, and that is just understanding not even who you choose to bring onto that particular platform, but also how can that serve that particular individual beyond that one-time appearance, right? One of the things that I've learned as a podcast host of kind of myself is that in those situations when I bring on different guests, and some of them might be one-time encounters, others might lead to multiple appearances and other ways to support it. I think what I'm choosing to do is better understand how can I support this person beyond the one time. So if the person is looking for a job, if the person is looking for a connection in X, Y, and Z field, I think the question that I try and answer is, okay, if that is the case, then it is my responsibility to use the 30 to 45 to an hour time slot or all of the conversations prior to that live podcast recording to better understand where that person is and how I can support them moving forward. So creating that space with strategy, I think, is key, and understanding where that person is along that particular chapter of their lives, so that way I can support them in the best way that I can moving forward.
Thank you.
when I think about creating a community, like if I'm going to create a sex positive community space, I want to give voices to the people who never have voices, like the Black, trans women and men who are so underseen in that space. But not only do I want to give them the floor to educate all of the members of our club, I also want to ask them, how can we bring more of your community into this space? How can we make this a safe space for your community also? What can we share with my community to better support your community? Because oftentimes, even within the gay community or the LGBTQIA plus community, it's different factions, right? And oftentimes, cisgender white men will not understand trans people, and they'll be confused by it or whatever, and they won't believe that it's real part of that being queer and being gay. And I think that those voices go unseen a lot. So being a queer person and working in sex positive spaces, I want to be able to bridge the gap between those spaces and be able to not only give one voice, but to give their whole community a voice. And then for my community to have that lens of their voice, and then be able to leave my party and go to all of where they go, and then have this lens and voice everywhere they go. I think that's really, for me, what I want to do with passing the mic. It's not just passing the mic to me, it's passing the mic to my entire community and encouraging them as the leader of that community to go back and share that message. This is not a one-way street here. And I think Katie kind of said it earlier, where it was like, well, you have to do that work on your own. And I think, yes, a lot of white people should be doing that work right now, but I also think it's a little bit dangerous to do it in a silo. If you're only doing it with yourself and you're not activating what you're learning, like you can read James Baldwin until the day you die, but if you're not applying those things with your life and screwing up, it's not going to be easy and fluid. You're not just going to read James Baldwin and then be a professor of diversity, right? Like you really have to struggle. And I've been called out by friends in spaces where I made mistakes, and it made me a stronger person to say, okay, I'm better at navigating. I know where I lie. So I think when it comes to being LGBT, it's creating bridges to those different communities, and then those bridges don't go one way; they go two ways. They go back and forth.
There's a lot of the same in the disability community. You kind of talk about cisgender, gay, white men. Mental health is kind of the redheaded stepchild, for lack of a better term there, of the disability community, right? So if you have physical disabilities, if you have cognitive disabilities that are evident, then your disabilities are real. If you're struggling with mental health, then those are things you're doing to get attention. They're not real. And that's at the most senior levels of our community. And every day I meet people who are struggling to stay alive, to stay stable. We're losing people because my community won't accept us. And I think that is one thing that I have to do more of, is just making sure that the voice for people who have mental illness, who have hidden disabilities, is getting the recognition that our journey is very valid. And it's not the same as a person with a physical disability. It's not. And that's a fair statement, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working together and supporting each other. And that's one thing that I've really struggled with in my own community of being engaged and understood, even as a white woman. You really think that I know I have a lot of privilege, but that's one thing that we're just not really very accepted on. And so we have a lot of work to do in that space.
So something that Topanga just said really resonated with me, and nobody should pity or feel sympathy for white men. We've had many centuries of running shit, but we will get it wrong. Many of us, when we're trying to help, when we're trying to ask questions to understand, when we're trying to do things to make things better, we're going to get it wrong. And I can't even explain where this comes from, but like when want to try and help and I get it wrong, and then somebody just tells me you're an a-hole and you got it wrong and you're not doing it right, it makes me less inclined to try to help more. So again, I'm not saying anybody should sympathize at all with what white men are going through, but create space to where we can screw up, to what Topanga said. Like if I can screw up and you can say, here's where you screwed up, try it that way next time. Like, awesome. Thank you so much. Right. Versus, I feel weird even saying this, and I feel like I'm about to get like Twitter blasted on my profile, but like, I just want to help. And if I do it wrong, if I get completely piled on after that, I just feel defeated. Right. I'm sure most people feel that way. So help white people, white men, to figure out how not to screw it up. And then when we do inevitably screw it up, because we're good at that, then help us understand like how to improve.
Can I jump in for a second? I also think like, yes, there is room to mess up, but I also think like white male fragility needs to be like a little bit stronger. Like if someone calls you an asshole, you say, yeah, I'm an asshole and I can try harder. Like,
I totally agree. We're not used to it. That's all I'm saying. Like it's going to take time. It's going to take time.
Full force. And I think that's what's happening right now is that, you know, just like we're saying, like unconscious bias can't be a thing anymore. Sorry. Like it's not unconscious. It's there, and you have to work towards dismantling it within yourself in order for you to be able to pass the mic to anyone. So I think like, yes, there's that factor where like, you're going to get scared and say, I did the wrong thing and someone called me an asshole and I'm getting reamed down on Twitter, or in the comments of your Instagram post or whatever. But you have to say, well, this is where my mentality was, and I will learn to listen better and I will learn to try harder. And it's not going to deter me from what the message I am attempting to give.
Yeah. I meant less about criticism online, because I don't care about internet criticism so much, but like from people that I trust and know, I want them to help me be better at all times, if that's possible. And yeah, I totally agree. White male fragility, like we've got a problem, but if we do hold a lot of leverage, y'all, the white people, the white women in this conversation, the people of color that are watching this should leverage the leverage that we have to their advantage, right? Like they should not be seeking to villainize well-intentioned behavior. And instead, like if I had the power to hire 5 people and I don't hire people of color because I'm biased, if you teach me and instruct me and help me understand it, then I can do better. If you just villainize me, and I'm just, again, not me, but if you just villainize me, then
Right, you're going to shut down.
Nothing changes.
You're going to shut down. I mean, and that's your natural. That's your body's natural defense mechanism. We all go fight, flight, freeze, or appease. Right.
Yep.
So we all have a natural reaction to do that. But I think what white men really need to do right now is to do everything they can to get in touch with like their body responses and say, okay, why is that body response happening? What can I do to solve it? Rather than just saying, I need more help. And saying, no, what help can I give myself, and what can I control inside of me to not have that knee-jerk reaction, to have a reasoned reaction and not a reactionary response.
Yeah, I totally agree, and we're on a long road as white men for that. Hopefully we can accelerate it. I totally agree, though. Thank you.
Yeah, and Sean, I'll just add. Sorry, Mila, I know you want to go to the next question. I think the other piece that I would say is think about how uncomfortable it is for whoever's on the other side of that as well. So I understand that it's hard, and learning is hard, and making mistakes is hard. But when you have been in that oppressed group for as long as folks have, you are frustrated. And it is a situation where you're like, figure it out. And so I understand that you don't want to have people shutting you down, but at the same time, step back and be uncomfortable. And it's okay to be uncomfortable, because that's how we learn. And making mistakes, that's how we learn. And we all know that. Like if you think about, back at your life, where did you learn the most things? It's when you've made a mistake, and that's how you get better. So, and I don't want to pick on Sean anymore. I love that you brought it up.
I mean, I think I will say that was
Yeah, sorry.
Pretty sure that's what I'm here for, right?
Right?
Is that why I'm here at this point? I'll just say, being uncomfortable for white men, and I hate to just like, oh, all white men. Being uncomfortable for white men is a new phenomenon. And again, like I said before, nobody.
Yeah,
yes, I think I totally agree. Nobody should pity us. I'm just saying, it's new to us. Therefore, we're gonna react poorly probably. So let's accelerate getting to actual improvement for everybody. Don't feel bad for me. I'm wrong all the time, pretty regularly.
I don't want to. I just gotta say this: white male fragility is not anything new, right? White male fragility is the cause of rape and genocide of Native people and African people, right? Like that stems from y'all discomfort, that stems from y'all infragility, and ours too, as white women, right? I'm not saying it's a male or non-woman problem, right? But to say that, oh, it's like a new thing we're discovering, like that is the core of this colony. That is the core of Western identity, right? So I think it's just, if we look at the spectrum of the history since race was created, it's really important to have that context in, it's not a new thing. And white male violence is the response to discomfort and the response to being challenged.
Yeah, and the last thing, I swear to God, the other piece of this also is that while we are learning and while we are growing, there's also the fact that we're going to make mistakes, yes, but it's also about how do you not take it as, oh, they're after me, they're attacking me? No, that's not what's happening. It's the patriarchy. It's the systems of oppression that we've put into place that we need to break down. So don't take it as, hey, we're all here attacking Sean at all. And I know it's hard to not do that. I find myself in that same space when I feel like, oh, wow, I did something wrong. We all do. But it's not about Sean. It's about the patriarchy, the systems, the processes, all of these things that we put into place that we need to take down.
And how that lives within ourselves. I had to have a hard conversation with a white founder of a company a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, you're using patriarchal structures in your company. And she's like, well, we're all about smashing the patriarchy. I'm like, yeah, but you have to smash the patriarchy in yourself first. It's there, right? And she was like, well, this is always what I've been taught. And I was like, well, how did that work out for you? Not great. Well, would you like to do it a different way? It's yours. This is your company to make it what you want it to be. So, sorry, Mila. Yes, it lives within us all, and it's about smashing the shit out of it.
Thank you for sharing. So a few things that I want to touch on. Sean mentioned about asking for the bigger question, right? And what are we doing wrong? And also, Katie, you mentioned about we have to accept about making mistakes. And I want to highlight something really quickly. Just like when you make mistakes, we're talking about the white community and POC, we have to also become conscious of how have we treated POCs or people of minority groups when they make mistakes? How have they been scrutinized? How have the white community scrutinized them? And when it's time for you to make mistakes, we have to become conscious of how are we making mistakes? How have we scrutinized others when they were making mistakes, right? My husband is white. And when he says insensitive things, I check him. And I say, hey, that's not a very sensitive thing to say. And I tell him, and he would ask me, why isn't it a sensitive thing? And I'll make him understand. Because you have the privilege, you're living in the United States. Oppression just does not happen in the United States. I've lived in different parts of the world. I grew up in different parts of the world. And it's just not, I haven't lived in a different part of the world that has got a monoculture. I've come from countries where it's multicultural, multi-import. So I've been exposed to oppression at numerous granular levels where colorism, marginalization, gender inequity comes into place. So when we are called out, even as white male, right, we have to truly understand how does machismo come into play? What is machismo? How is machismo integrated into systems, right? When I was in university, I went back to university to learn about human conditioning after my engineering in the United States. And I had a white professor teaching conflict analysis and resolution put me in check because I challenged him respectfully. The machismo came into play, and it was because it was a class where we had to take on rules to act out. And I raised my hand and I said, Professor so-and-so, I like to act as the main lead. He just ignored me. And again, I said, I like to play as the second lead. He ignored me. And then I said, well, clearly you're ignoring me and you're picking my white peers to be the leading role. And at the end of everyone being assigned a role, he looked at me and said, you can be the black crow playing in the play. And I said, you are clearly discriminating me. And I always urge people to say, to become allies when you see things like this play out, let it be in school systems, right? Let it be anywhere. As allies, you have to stand up and speak up and recognize in what forms does machismo come into play? In what forms does making mistakes come into play? That professor clearly made a mistake in using power to oppress me, not just as a colored person, but as a foreign student. And we, as allies, we need to stand up and say, hey, how can we educate? And that, to the question of Sean, what do people not understand? It is the lack of education, because systemic placements have been put into the United States for years, from workplaces to segregation of zip codes, to collecting your zip code when you go to the supermarket that you don't even realize, right? I mean, if you live in a posh neighborhood, you get more coupons or you get discounts, right? We need to really understand from this perspective. So I wanted to highlight that really quickly. And this is not a space of attacking, and it's a safe space. And these are the kind of conversations we need to start having in our communities. Just like I have hard conversations with my white husband and with my white in-laws, right? And they always say, like, even though I'm not from India, they are convinced that I'm from India. Things like that. We need to become courageous in having those conversations, like, hey, what is it that you're not willing to listen when someone is telling, right? It's not that we are muting other people. We are not willing to listen. We're not willing to remove our blinders. It's just like when a bird is outside our window and it's chirping away. What do we do? Shut the window. We don't even realize whether the bird is being attacked. It's just like that. When people of minority groups or POCs are being attacked, I'm not going to say attacked like physically, but attacked in nuanced ways. We have to become more conscious. We have to remove our blinders and really have that ownership and rise for action as allies and say, hey, that's not right. It hurts. My ego is being hurt, but I'm going to leave my ego at the door and say, how can I learn with an open mind and open heart? So I want to bring this question to all of you before we end. What is one solution that you are working towards right now to bring equity in your space, as all of you are doing fabulous work in your spaces?
I'll jump in. I was thinking when BLM really got traction, took hold, and protests started, and it seemed like we're actually going to start paying more attention to this over the long haul. I stopped and thought, I don't know what to say. I don't know how I can help. I don't know how much, should I just listen? What should I do? And I published a Facebook Live or whatever on this, and it was 10 minutes. And it took me a few days, but I realized that the best thing I can do, not in my position of authority or power or influence or anything like that, be curious. The antidote to prejudice, the antidote to racism, the antidote to sexism is legitimate curiosity. If you think about somebody like stereotypical person who lives in the South and they're a white person, they're raised and they hate people of color, they are raised with the certainty that people who don't look like them are bad or are lesser, right? And I've seen it a million times where somebody who's raised in an environment like that, they go to college, they make friends who are of various ethnicities, and they're like, oh, this isn't exactly what I thought at all, right? being legitimately curious about other people, about their upbringing, about the situation they're in, the economic disadvantage they're in. We've talked a ton about hiring disadvantages and all these things. Being legitimately curious and listening. And again, I said this maybe an hour ago, not talking and trying to solve the problem, which is a big problem for me as an engineer and a white guy. Being curious and listening is, I think, the best thing that I can do. And that if you don't have any other options or you don't have any other ideas, that's your first thing. Be curious.
I'll piggyback off that. I completely agree. I think curiosity is the best thing that you can bring to any situation. Being curious about what you're doing, whether it's your sexuality or someone you're dating, or even if someone's challenging you, your first response could be, "Oh, I'm curious about why. Like, what are you challenging me about? How can I look at the mirror and say, okay, how can I be curious about myself and my responses?" And for me, creating a space the question was bringing equity into the space. And I think it's about creating an equitable space. Like if you're creating a space from the ground up, especially, or a business or a department at your job, not saying, "Oh, I'm going to bring equity in like it's there to visit." It needs to become an equitable space from the ground up, right? It's like having the Black person, your only Black person on your company being assigned the D&I job. Like, no, we need their voices everywhere. We need to create the board that looks as diverse as the people that we're serving. So it's bringing that from the ground up and then bringing everyone along the journey with you, and not saying it's like being queer and saying, "Oh, we're going to do something for June because it's Pride Month." No, we have to help our queer folks all the time. It doesn't just happen in June, right? Just slapping a rainbow on our PayPal sticker doesn't make us cool with queer people. Right. So I think it's making an equitable space is creating it from the inside out, not just bringing it to the table, but making a whole new table that's equitable.
So for me, it's a bit of an exciting time working for a nonprofit and really a disability organization. One thing that I've been challenging our executive team to do is bring more diversity to our board, and also to create a place where our Black colleagues can grow within the space. And as a really predominantly white-led organization, to have conversations that are very uncomfortable and to kind of push that forward. And, over the last couple of years, what I've really been in the position to be able to do that, I haven't gotten that traction. And now it feels like we are getting that traction, and we're going to help support some ERGs and some safe spaces. And instead of starting with disability, we're going to start with a Black ERG. And I think for us, that is such a tremendous step forward. I know it's not like groundbreaking or anything, but it is actually taking that step and creating ways to build up the bench so that we can have more diversity and being thoughtful about it, as opposed to just saying, we just can't, it's just not interesting. We've got to focus on what's us, which is disability. And so for me, that's kind of the big new thing that I'm going to be taking on to support my Black colleagues in how to structure an ERG, how to do that kind of thing so that they have support from an expert, but I'm not leading. I'm there to listen and support and help them get the organization that they need to help grow within our organization.
All right. A couple things. So I think the first is something that kind of has already been mentioned, is creating spaces for conversations like this, but also creating spaces where we can listen to people of color, that we can listen to the experiences of others and believe them. And I think that's a key piece too, is that there is this sense of, it didn't happen to me, so it's not true. So making sure that we're actually believing the stories that we're hearing. And no, we don't need to see a video of someone being murdered to actually believe that someone was murdered. No, we don't actually have to, see a picture or whatever it might be. So just being thoughtful about listening, but also believing. And I think the other piece is not, and I kind of already mentioned this earlier, not depending on our friends, our family members, whoever that might be, that identify as people of color or people in the LGBT community to be the answer. We have to do this work on our own. And Topanga, absolutely not in a silo for sure. I agree with what you said earlier. It is about asking questions and learning more, but also understanding the burden that's on all of the folks that we know right now that are in these marginalized communities, that weight of this, that I can take off at the end of the day, and I can go do whatever I want to do as a white cisgender female, that my colleagues, that my friends cannot. So being thoughtful about that fact and being thoughtful about the fact of what privilege I have to be able to go about the work that I do in this way. And then I think the last piece is understanding what equity is. So I think a lot of times people talk about equality, they talk about equity, they talk about, oh, well, we did this one thing, so now everything's fair. How are we actually doing this to truly create equity? Because it might not be the same for everyone. Equality is the same. Equity is, what do you as an individual need? And remembering that so that we're doing the right things for the individual and making sure that we're bringing everyone along, not just certain people.
Something I'm working on currently in my community is a local hiring campaign within tech in the Bay Area. So if you're on the live and you want to tap in, please add me on Instagram or on LinkedIn, and I'll be sure to engage you. But we, several other folks who are born and raised in San Francisco, and I, they're all Black leaders in the city within and around tech. We are starting a local hiring campaign to demand that tech respects and engages, right? 1% to 2% of these tech companies are comprised of local talent, which is abhorrent, right? Tech is an extension of the settler process. Folks came out west to conquer and take advantage of the territory, with really not including who is here and who has been here, right? So that's one thing that I'm doing. That's, again, long-term kind of organizing and campaign work, which a lot of our wins come from. They don't come from, like, social media posts and whatnot. That's part of the process. But really the coalitions we build and the long-term campaigns that we're working towards. So the work is to, destabilize the kind of cultural norms that exist within tech currently, and bring working class folks in the door who deserve those jobs more than anyone who is currently there. So that's something that I'm working on. Again, if you want to tap into that, if you work in tech and are down to connect with us, please reach out to me.
Thank you everyone for being here and sharing the space with me. To truly dismantle discrimination, we need to understand how granular discrimination manifests in spaces in where POC and other minorities exist. We have to start dismantling it at grassroots levels where we do become allies, partners, and sponsors through partnership. Privilege is largely held by white communities in the USA. Take a look at board directors, as what Topanga mentioned today, C-suite levels, management level, school board level. It is time to become allies, and most importantly, sponsors in stripping the systems in place and designing and building the new now. We often talk about teams that are romanticized in the form of future tense, like future of work, future of us, future of diversity. How about we create the now of us, and that is heartship, the now of leadership in us, which is a pillar of my culture science company Chief of Hearts. I leave you with this thought tonight. Or ask yourself this question when you see discrimination occurring. How can I use my privilege to make the oppressor accountable? Thank you everyone for being here. You can find all the speakers on the panel today on LinkedIn, and I'll be putting up the information on LinkedIn and on YouTube. You can find them. Thank you everyone for being here and sharing this space with me today. Thank you all viewers for viewing. Be sure to follow on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and on Facebook. Don't go anywhere, panelists. We will be back. And thank you everyone for watching. Have a brilliant, brilliant Thursday and a beautiful night. And good morning, APAC and me.